Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Ben, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So Fresh Red Kills are the videos where I talk about books that I have recently finished reading. I don't call my videos book reviews. These are really informal discussions. My videos are unscripted. They are informal. I will stumble in my speech. I will make mistakes. I am not going to edit that stuff out. And that's what you get when you get to my channel. I'm going to be talking about two books that I read in the beginning of March. So that is Troy by Stephen Fry and Spirit of the New England Tribes. So I'll start off with Troy. This is something I had read as part of Historathon 2025. Historathon is a year-long reading event where we read, discuss, and celebrate nonfiction history, and we divide the Europe into quarters, each quarter being 3 months long and looking at a different time period. Basically, we start at the beginning of the year, the first 3 months, looking at prehistory up to the year 500 CE, and then each time we go into a new quarter, we get closer to the present. And I read that as part of this. Now, this isn't strictly Historathon. This is more like a side quest, another way to learn about and experience history that's not nonfiction history. But still, it was in the spirit of it that I read this. I had read in January Stephen Fry's Mythos. So that is the first in a trilogy. This is the last in the trilogy. There's also a book in the middle called Heroes that I don't own. But I was so impressed with Mythos, I wanted to make sure I got to this one as well. And just like Mythos, I not only went through the book, I did a lot of immersive reading because I was listening to the audiobook where Stephen Fry reads it. And he does a terrific job reading his own work. He does the voices great, and he likes to write with a lot of alliteration, which he knows how to kind of emphasize and enunciate correctly, and I love alliteration. And just like Mythos, this was great. So Mythos was a retelling of Greek myths, not exactly the hero stories, that's in that second volume. And this is a retelling of Troy, right, of the Trojan War. And he goes back into history to give us the kind of mythological beginnings of Troy. The war itself maybe starts about halfway through. And, of course, we get the story of Achilles and Agamemnon and Odysseus and all of them. It doesn't go into the Odyssey or anything. But he does a great job with it. It's easy to follow, even with all these characters and complicated sort of storylines and asides. He does a great job making it very understandable and readable. And throughout there, it's a very beautiful book. I'm just trying to find an example because he has these nice, full color plates in there as well. All these classical paintings or various other types of artwork that are showing these mythological scenes. So he does a great job with it. And I would highly recommend this, and I would especially also recommend the audiobook. Now, I don't have too much to say about it. Stephen Fry, I think he does a good job kind of taking you by the hand and leading you through the Trojan War. He doesn't assume that you know really anything about it necessarily, but he also doesn't talk down to you. He's letting you know when there's conjecture. He's letting you know some other interpretations of things where maybe certain scholars might disagree. And then, that's just kind of as an aside, and then he will bring you right back into the story. These are just delightful. I do want to get my hands on Heroes, that second in the trilogy, and maybe next year. That'll be something I try and get to for next year's quarter one of Historathon. But yeah, beautiful book design, great writing, and again, the audiobook was terrific. So I highly recommend this. And I also read this. So I had found this in a local secondhand bookstore about a month or so ago, and I just kind of really immediately started diving into it. I have an interest in sort of pre-Christian religions, especially Northern European versions of those, of like pagan religions, but also, I live in Connecticut, and I want to know, how did things like ritual and animism play out on my own land, before the arrival of Europeans and Christianity. And that information can be very difficult to get. The local tribe for my area is the Scotticoke, and they converted to Christianity, I think entirely, pretty much by like the 1740s. So there isn't much left over for us to examine. There might be some things out there, but it's hard to find them online. So when I went into the secondhand bookshop and found this sitting there, I was really happy to get it. This was originally published in the 1980s. Let's see what it was, 1986. William S. Simmons. So again, the subtitle, the full title is Spirit of the New England Tribes, Indian History and Folklore by William S. Simmons. And this was published by University Press of New England, which is now defunct. So I don't know how many copies are actually out there of this. And he is doing kind of exactly what I wanted to find out, right? The sorts of things that I wanted to find out about. He has taken text evidence from the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, into the 1900s, and then even in the early 80s, he was going to the different tribes and he was trying to get whatever oral history was still available. So all of that is combined, and he curates it by certain subjects so that we can see the ways that the Native Americans of southern New England, it says, New England tribes, but it's really specifically southern New England, and especially the kind of corner where eastern Connecticut, Rhode Island, and eastern Massachusetts are. And actually Martha's Vineyard gets quite a bit of focus here because they had sort of an intact community that seemed to have held on to its stories and wrote them down more than a lot of the other areas did. So I live in western Connecticut, so it's not exactly where I am, but it's pretty close, and the Schaghticoke do actually get a brief mention here at least. They are, think of maybe the Mohegan umbrella of tribes. And again, what he's doing here is he has taken all that evidence, all that information, and he categorizes. So we can see from the earliest time period in the records, what did it appear, Native Americans believed about certain things. And of course, a lot of times we're hearing this from European perspectives, especially in the early period. They're writing about what the Native Americans say and believe rather than we're hearing from Native Americans themselves. As time goes on, we start hearing more from Native Americans, but by that point, a lot of times they have been Christianized. But Simmons is trying to trace what's actually indigenous, or if they've adopted things from Europeans as far as folklore, is there an indigenous spin that we can find? So he kind of goes into their kind of history, their worldview, the first Europeans, etc. Then we get chapters that are just right up my alley. We got shamans and witches. What did they think about that? Ghosts and the devil. That was quite fun. We've got treasures, especially like pirate treasures, and treasure hoards. And we have a very long section on giants. I guess that in the Martha's Vineyard area, they believed in a giant called Mashup. And it's interesting to kind of trace he kind of starts off as this very benevolent giant. And then as time goes on, he seems to get more kind of cranky and a little bit sinister. And then he seems to split up into two different, like a benevolent version and then like an evil version. So over the centuries, you can see the story change depending on who's telling it and maybe what's going on politically at the time with the Native Americans. That section did admittedly get a little bit dry because I was reading the same story basically over and over and over again, just with slightly different twists. And then after that, we have a section on the little people. So sort of like fairies, which I guess there is evidence for, especially the other New England tribes in the north having a lot of belief of little people. It was hard to find evidence about the southern New Englanders, southern New England tribes, I mean. But I guess there was enough to find evidence. And then there's like windows to the past, different ritualistic areas like putting sticks or stones on these large rocks, and perhaps what it meant, different ritual reasons that communities seem to do, Native American communities did for like generation after generation after generation, even if they seem to forgot why they did it. So a lot of that is really interesting. And, there's it was fascinating to see how long animism lasted. I kind of marked this one area. 1928, they were talking about a doctor, Dr. William Perry, who was a doctor in the 1900s, in the 18th century, I believe, if I remember correctly. And he was a very well-respected healer amongst both the whites and Native Americans. And he would make offerings to this kind of like spiritual deity called Granny Squannet. who I think is somehow related to that giant mashup. But essentially, she's later on seems to be depicted as like this kind of small woman, maybe kind of fairy-like in certain ways. But she's kind of like a land spirit. And he would leave, I think, like, he would leave offerings outside for Granny Squannet, and that's how he, believed that he was getting his sort of healing powers. But it's fascinating to see into the 1800s, a well-respected doctor who is performing animism, I think he was in Connecticut, maybe. I don't remember exactly where he was. But, who is still, carrying on this tradition, and that late. I just thought that was really, really quite fascinating. The other thing that's interesting about this is, the way that Simmons is talking about the Native American communities that he is visiting, and, their sort of political situations. Now they're trying to get recognition. This is before we got the big casinos in Connecticut. So before Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods, these, enormous and incredibly wealthy Native American run casinos. This is, a precursor to that. So it's kind of crazy to think those communities and those locations that he's talking about, what they are like now. But yeah, this is cool. I was really happy to find this, and it answered, at least to some degree, a lot of questions that I had, a lot of curiosities that I had about, again, ritual and animism, and the way those things might have looked in a pre-Christian New England. So yeah, glad to read that. So again, these are two books that I read in the beginning of March this month. So we got Spirit of the New England Tribes and Troy by Stephen Fry. Two winners for me. If you've read either of these, I know this one isn't as likely, but love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.